Wait a minute, Wolverine's family member created Weapon X? And Wolverine has an actual cousin who is a member of Canada's premier superhero team, Alpha Flight? Welcome back, Nerd Squad, it's me, Amanda. I guess when it comes to starting off a video where we are talking about the Wolverine family tree, it's best to start at its crunchy adamantium core, with Wolverine himself, aka Logan, aka James Howlett. Like Magneto, Wolvie has a bunch of names too throughout the years, including one of my favorites, Patch. And also like Magneto, he has a very tragic origin story, one that we've seen explained multiple times both in the comics and in Wolverine Origins the film, which is a movie that happened. Oh boy did it happen. And also like Magneto, Wolverine started out as a villain in the comics, albeit much more briefly, and I guess more of an antagonist than a straight up villain, making his first appearance as the Hulk's adversary in the Hulk's own comic series, launching a rivalry that has actually spanned decades. Is it weird that I keep comparing Wolverine to Magneto? Yeah, let's stop doing that and jump into this family tree. Initially, all we knew of Wolverine was that he was a mutant, and in fact it was even suggested in the beginning that the adamantium claws that he possessed themselves were actually genetic. It wouldn't be till later that we'd actually learn the adamantium on his skeleton was actually added later on by Weapon X through a painful bonding procedure that few test subjects could survive, let alone benefit from, with the main time that we all kind of figured that out being when Magneto stripped the adamantium from him. That was a thing that was very memorable. Before he was Wolverine though, who was Wolverine? Well, if you ever asked Logan himself, he actually might struggle to answer this question due to all the tampering done to his mind, as well as years of both physical and emotional trauma that his brain had suffered and healed from. It's actually believed that the reason why Wolverine doesn't often remember things from his past is because his brain heals over painful memories, and that scar tissue and his healing factor's self-preservation instincts could contribute to memory loss. But also, Wolvie has been shot and stabbed in the head. A lot, which I think would mess with anybody's memories. If they could heal, definitely not. If you couldn't heal, well, you wouldn't have any memories because you'd be a dead guy. However, while Wolverine might struggle to remember his many pasts, fans of the characters likely won't, or fans that have read his many pasts anyways, including Origins. Before Wolverine was a superhero or even was known by the name of Logan, he was James Howlett. James grew up as a sickly child who actually was perhaps lucky that he even made it to the point of his mutant powers manifesting, although I guess when you consider just how that happened and then everything that came after that and all of Logan's life, Logan might not see himself as being quite so lucky. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's head back to Wolverine's origins. James was raised as the youngest son of a wealthy couple, John Howlett Sr. and his wife Elizabeth Howlett, who lived in Alberta, Canada. However, in truth, he was actually the biological son of Elizabeth and the Howlett's groundskeeper Thomas Logan, born out of an affair between the two. At least, that's what's heavily implied. John Sr. Howlett may have still been James's biological father, but as I said, it is heavily implied that he was not. Still, John raised James as if he were his own anyway. Whether this was because he was not aware of his wife's affair or simply because he just felt it was the right thing to do, despite her infidelity, seeing James still as one of his own. We don't really know that much about John Sr. Howlett, although he seemed to have a kind heart, but it is implied that he was the one to deal the death blow to John Jr., James's older brother, doing so in defense of their mother, Elizabeth, after John Jr.'s powers, because he also had powers, manifested and he went into a rage. This likely weighed on John Sr. heavily. Also, yes, if you were wondering, Wolverine had a brother. We'll talk about that more in a bit. Elizabeth Hudson Howlett was Wolverine's mother. Hudson was Elizabeth's maiden name and would actually be a very important name when it came to Wolverine's story later in life, but we'll get back to that in a bit. And it seems likely that when it comes to Logan's X gene, he may actually get it from her side of the family or from his biological father's side, or a combination thereof, though more than likely I think it's from Elizabeth's side of the family. She gave birth to not one mutant, it turns out, but two! Though both sons may have been fathered by Thomas Logan, in the alternate reality of Earth 4011 that appears in Wolverine The End, it is stated that Elizabeth is where Wolverine gets his X gene from. Now of course that's not main continuity, but still some people feel like that's, could also apply to the main continuity. The traumatic and life-threatening experience she had with her first son is implied to be what caused her to be sent to a mental institution. Eventually though she would return, but life would forever be changed at the Howlett estate, with Elizabeth mostly preferring to hide in her room, even neglecting her younger son James as a result. As we have previously stated, young James also had an elder brother who passed away, John Jr. Howlett. John Jr. Howlett may have also truly been the biological son of Elizabeth and Thomas Thomas Logan, the groundskeeper, but we don't really know that for sure. What we do know is that John Jr. died young, after apparently also being born a mutant. It's believed that his father killed him out of defense of his mother, who he had attacked. Some believe to this day that John Jr. may even still be out there somewhere, alive, possessing powers similar to Wolverine, despite the fact that Wolverine seemed to see his older brother during time spent in hell, which I think would be pretty crazy if we brought him back, but also I feel like if we haven't seen him at this point, where has he been? Aside from his elder brother who passed away, young James also had a half-brother in Dog Logan. Dog was the son of Thomas Logan and an unnamed woman. He grew up on the Howlett estate and became one of James's playmates along with Rose, who was brought in to live in the estate as a playmate for James while also being given serving duties as she got older. Dog at one point saved James's life after accidentally endangering it. However, Dog's feelings for Rose and forceful actions towards her, as well as his jealousy of James and all that he stood to inherit, drove a wedge between them as they grew up. Eventually, this division led Dog to attack James, causing him physical and emotional harm, with Dog and his father evicted from the estate as a result of this. Oddly enough, Dog somehow survived to the modern age, despite having been born like Wolverine in the late 19th century. At one point, he has a bunch of time diamonds, which I guess he could use to time travel, so this could be how he's lived so long, or perhaps his longevity is still as of yet an undefined power of his. We haven't seen him for a while, but still, pretty sure we saw him at least in like 2014 or something, so considering it's the 19th century and then we see him in a comic from 2014, that's a little what's happening there? We don't know. Thomas Logan is heavily implied to be the biological father of James Howlett, which seems to have been why he used Logan as an alias in the past. Although, as I've said previously, James's mind also became so addled that eventually he would not remember his true name as James Howlett, and would forget the connection of that name, Logan, to his biological father. So he might have just picked that name he thought randomly, but it wasn't so random. In fact, when Dog eventually comes to look for James and Rose years after they have fled the estate, James initially does not even recognize Dog or remember who he is or that he's a Logan. Thomas was a hard man, driven to drink and often behaving aggressively, especially towards his own son who lived with him, Dog. In fact, this is likely a big part of the reason that Dog turned out the way he did. After both Thomas and Dog were removed from the Howlett estate, Thomas snuck back onto the property, killing the Howlett servants and using Rose to gain access to Elizabeth's room, and of course bringing Dog along with him. There, Thomas attempted to get Elizabeth to run away with him before being confronted by John Sr., who Thomas then just killed. This is what caused James's mutant powers to manifest, as he sort of came into all this chaos, and in a blind fit of loss, desperation, and rage, he scarred Dog and killed Thomas with his bone claws. The trauma of the whole occurrence and its similarity to the tragic event of her first son proved too much for Elizabeth, who blamed herself and took her own life. James and Rose, also overwhelmed, chose to leave the estate, fleeing together. If you thought Thomas Logan was bad, well, I mean, you would be right, but while John Sr. seems like a well-meaning sweetheart by comparison, his own father was more akin to Thomas than his own son in terms of his cruelty. We don't know his name, but Mr. Howlett, or the Old Man as he was sometimes referred to, is the grandfather of Wolverine and the father of John Sr. He was the one who forged the Howlett name and created their fortune through unknown means. The Old Man was critical of John Sr. and his offspring, and may have even at one point threatened the life of young John Jr. because of his mutant gene. He constantly harped on John Sr., criticizing his parenting skills as he felt James was too weak and too soft. After Dog blamed Rose for the deaths of Thomas, John Sr., and Elizabeth, Mr. Howlett disowned James, although he did still help him and Rose escape town, and years later would actually come to regret sending his grandson away, giving Dog, then his heir and ward, information to help track James and Rose down once more so that he might actually make amends. However, Dog, of course, had some other plans. He was like, yeah, I'll do that. I'll totally do that. I'm not gonna go and try to kill this person who stands to potentially take an inheritance away from me that I just got. Wouldn't do that at all. Oh yeah, he definitely tried to do that. From the beginning almost, young James's life was steeped in tragedy. A tragedy so great, in fact, that he wouldn't even remember most of it as time went on. That's how great it was. Not even Rose, who also tragically died by accident at Wolverine's claws during a fight between him and Dog, after Dog had tracked him down with information information given to him by the old man. Wolverine would see Rose's spirit in visions when close to death, but not remember her or his own past. He would often mistake her for Jean instead, which kinda makes sense because Rose and Jean do look very similar. And Jean herself has also of course appeared in Wolverine's death visions in spirit form. Often too, because you know, half the time Jean happens to be dead in the comics it seems anyways, so that makes sense. However, this is only the beginning of Wolverine's tragedies. Tragedy would plague Wolverine throughout his family tree, even extending through his mother's heritage and her own family, the Hudsons. Elizabeth Hudson had two brothers, Elias and Frederick. Both survived their parents, who died tragically in a shipwreck. Everything is a tragedy when it comes to any story attached to Wolverine. Even his mother's family couldn't escape this comic book curse. Elias seems to have been the older brother, as he was the one who ended up running the family business, the Hudson Bay Company, which by the way is a real department store company that has strong ties and roots in Canada, so I kind of love that the Hudsons are related to the Hudson Bay Company. Wolverine even at one point unknowingly works for his uncle Elias, who was later driven to take his own life, shortly after Wolverine left. Mental health seems to be something that the Hudsons struggled with throughout their history, probably something Wolverine should watch out for. Actually, I feel like Wolverine has also struggled with that, so I mean we all struggle with that, so fair enough. Frederick, however, ended up working with the Canadian military, overseeing a training facility, a facility that ended up being used by notorious and often confusing Wolverine villain Romulus, who was retconned to have been the mysterious figure making Wolverine's life even more tragic the whole time. Like he even needed help in that department at all, Romulus, jeez. And of course, as Romulus enters the equation, here is where Hudson's involvement with Wolverine gets really weird, but kinda great, but really weird. Logan ended up at the military training facility where Victor Creed, aka Sabretooth, and Silas Burr, aka Cyber, and currently known as Hornet, would also be. Under orders from Frederick, who did not know that Logan was his nephew, Burr was instructed to make Logan's life living hell in order to turn him into a loyal killer. Another of Romulus's agents, Janet, was also used to manipulate Logan through having him fall in love with her, but not of course so she could persuade Logan to do what she wanted, as you can kinda do with people that, you know, love you, you can kinda convince them of things, but unbeknownst to her, so she could be basically fridged, aka killed, thereby motivating Logan in one way or another. Another classic Romulus plot. Frederick himself would later be killed on Romulan's orders by his great-nephew Daken, aka Akahiro, the son of Wolverine. Frederick never had any children with his wife, but did have an illegitimate son with his secretary, whom she vengefully named Frederick Hudson II in order to hurt Frederick's relationship with his wife. Take that, Frederick. His secretary Caitlin MacDonald took her own life sadly shortly after giving birth. While Frederick didn't do much of note in his own life, he did have three sons who are pretty relevant: Truett, Victor, and James. Frederick II himself died young as the result of a bar brawl, which is a pretty fitting way to go for anyone who's related to Wolverine. Truett Hudson, often referred to simply as Wolverine's cousin, though more specifically Wolverine's first cousin once removed, is one of the most important of the three. Truett is also known in the comics as the Professor, and while he is also bald, we are not talking about that professor, not Charles, aka Professor X. Instead, Truett was the Professor, also known by the alias Professor Thornton, who became tied to the Weapon Plus program, likely inspiring it as a result of stumbling into a lab in a World War II German camp that actually belonged to, get this, Nathaniel Essex, aka Mr. Sinister. What a strange connection I never thought would exist, and yet it does. From there, Weapon Plus would later spawn the creation and project known as Weapon X, on their journey to create new super soldiers. This was following the success of Project Rebirth, which led to the creation of Captain America, who was labeled by the program as Weapon 1. The Professor would later be put in charge of brainwashing Team X operatives, among them Logan included, and would be known as Director of the Weapon X program. Yeah, that's the thing. That is literally his first cousin once removed, who was running that program. Truett actually also has ties to Dracula, another famous Wolverine enemy. Truett himself would be killed, seemingly and surprisingly, by Silver Fox, who at this point was believed to have actually been alive this whole time, and also now be evil and working for Hydra. And if you don't remember Silver Fox, she's one of Wolverine's first loves. However, in this reality, this probably wasn't actually Silver Fox, but a mutated clone of her. At least, all us Silver Fox fans are hoping that's what happened. Hopefully it's not really a silver fox. To this day, I think a lot of people say, that's a clone. Victor is the middle child of Frederick II's. He himself was also manipulated by Romulus, because isn't everyone? He acted as Romulus's right-hand man and was shown to be extremely durable and strong, although I don't know if we ever found out if he was a mutant or not. Victor was also born mute as well as blind. He met his end at the hands of Wolverine. Continuing right along with the three McDonald Hudson brothers, we also have James Hudson. That's right, Guardian of Alpha Flight. Andrew, are you proud of me? I found a way to work Alpha Flight into this video. Although considering Wolverine's history with the team, that really shouldn't be hard in general to do while talking about him, because he himself has also, been a pretty good ally and sometimes team member of Alpha Flight. But anyways, this isn't about Wolverine's life story. This video is about his relatives and his family connections. Enter James Hudson, also Wolverine's cousin and half-brother to the villainous Truette. Half-brother because all three brothers actually had different mothers. James was the youngest of the three, which means I got to save the best for last. Before Guardian was Guardian, James Hudson developed a suit for Amcan Oil Corporation to be used to help locate underground oil deposits. However, after he learned his suit was going to be sold to the US military and used as a weapon, which he was not here for, he destroyed its plans and stole the helmet of the suit, making it unusable. He then went to the Canadian government for help and protection from Amcan Oil. He would go on to become founder of Department H and the leader and founder of Alpha Flight. James Hudson and his wife, Heather McNeil Hudson, aka Vindicator, would also become fast friends with technical relative James Howlett, ever since they ran into a feral Logan on their honeymoon as seen in Alpha Flight issue number 33, which has a flashback to that. James and Heather have one daughter together, Claire, who would be, I think, a cousin twice removed to Wolverine. So that's also a thing. John Sr. and Elizabeth aren't the only ones with relatives relevant to Wolverine's history though. Thomas and the Logans also have an extensive past, and at least one relative that you might find at least interesting. Folkburn Logan. If Wolverine were to run his DNA through someplace like Ancestry.com, he'd learn that 1. He probably has a lot more kids than he ever knew about, and 2. That he was also related to Folkburn Logan. Folkburn lived back in the 11th century and is referred to by his fellow soldier and friend as the last pagan, living in London, England. Folkburn runs into Thor and the Horsemen of the Apocalypse during a fight between them, and is saved by Thor himself, just as he begins to pray to the old gods, hilariously, which I love, as seen in Uncanny Avengers issue number 6. While this pretty much covers all of Logan's family when it comes to where he comes from and his origins, there's a lot more tragedy ahead for us to explore when it comes to romance and his own offspring. We're running a little short for time on this video, so I'm going to briefly cover some of the major wives/loves and children we've come to know as related to Wolverine in the main comic book continuity of Earth 616. But if you enjoyed this video and you want a specific video about Wolverine's kids, let us know in the comments, or if you would rather perhaps something a little different, such as hearing me attempt to explain the history of Weapon X, or attempt to explain Mr. Sinister's family tree instead, both of which would probably also be a lot of fun. Be sure to let us know. When it comes to Wolverine's wives, there are two main ones that stick out to me. One of whom he was actually married to, another he was almost married to, but I think we can still count her. She's a pretty big deal. Other than Jean Grey and his weakness for redheads, the major loves of Wolverine's life I would say would be Mariko Yoshida, his fiancée, and Itsu, his wife. Although Wolverine was also shown to be married to the ancestor of a person named Hoshiko in the story Aftermath in Wolverine Exit Wounds, and was once also married to Ophelia Sarkissian, aka Viper. That's a thing that happened. With Mariko, their love did not produce any offspring, but it was a strong love regardless, and they did have a foster daughter together, so that's a thing. Mariko was introduced in X-Men issue 118, and we'd come to know her as the daughter of Lord Shinjin, the leader of Clan Yoshida, a crime syndicate in Japan. Mariko is also a cousin to Mutant Sunfire, which was how she first met Wolverine. The two fell in love and eventually ended up engaged after the death of Mariko's father. However, due to the manipulations of Mastermind, their wedding would be called off. Later, it would be back on but delayed until Mariko felt she had made right the wrongs that Mastermind's influence over her had caused. She died before they could be married though. While she would be resurrected much later, her and Wolverine's relationship would never really recover. Itsu is the wife of Logan, who he met, fell in love with, and married during his time training with Bando Saburo in Japan. Itsu became pregnant but was unfortunately assassinated by by Bucky Barnes, aka the Winter Soldier, before her child could be born. Initially, it was actually believed that their offspring did not survive, but later we learned that thanks to the power of the baby's X gene, it actually did survive. The baby was retrieved by Romulus, who left him on the doorstep of a well-off couple that would adopt him. However, Romulus would also manipulate this baby, named Akihiro, but cruelly nicknamed Daken, and now known by the codename Fang, to grow up to hate his father. His biological father, Wolverine, that is. Daken would attempt to destroy Logan while working for the Red Right Hand, seeking out those who were Wolverine's offspring that he either never knew existed or had forgotten about due to, once again, much tampering with his mind and just overall memory loss, and using those relatives as weapons against their father. This group was known as the Mongrels. They died at Wolverine's hands without him knowing of their true origin till after he'd killed them all. Tragedy. At one point, Daken and Wolverine would be pitted against one another by the machinations of Sabretooth, leading to Daken tragically being drowned by his own father in a puddle. But don't worry, he returned and later would reconcile with his dad, and now he isn't even known by the name Daken, but prefers to be addressed as Akihiro or Fang. Other prominent offspring of Logan's from the main continuity include Laura Kinney, aka X-23, who is also now known as Wolverine, his daughter and also his female clone, Gabriel Gabby Kinney, aka Scout, a clone of Laura, who is also seen as Wolverine's daughter, and Amiko, his adopted daughter, who has spent a lot of time being raised by Wolverine's good friend Yukio, and previously was raised in part by Wolverine's love and fiance Mariko, prior to her death of course.
Bruce Banner has a relatively small direct family. It happens when your best party trick is turning into a gamma irradiated green ball of rage. But through his time in Marvel Comics, he has accumulated quite the roster of human, alien, and gamma mutated companions. Today on Top 10 Nerd, I'm going to attempt to explain the Hulk family tree. Starting off with the One Below All. The One Below All is the dark side and a part of the same being known as the One Above All, who is the supreme ruler of the multiverse and the supreme embodiment of creation and compassion, which would make the One Below All the ultimate personification of destruction and hate. It resides in the lowest point of reality, called the Below Place, from which it rules. Sealed off from the rest of the multiverse through the metaphysical green doors, it manifests in other realities through extreme gamma, which is the mutagenic third form of gamma radiation. This radiation is what creates gamma mutates based off the individual's genetic and psychological makeup. Before we move on though, hey guys, if you're enjoying this channel, dropping a like is all you have to do to help us out. We would really appreciate it. But now, on to the man himself, Bruce Banner. Incredible Hulk #1 from 1962 introduced Dr. Robert Bruce Banner to the Marvel Universe and gave us the very first gamma mutate. During a routine test of the gamma bomb he developed, Bruce spotted a teenager named Rick Jones in the blast radius and he took it upon himself to save Rick's life. He succeeded, but his bomb's explosion opened the first green door, which is a metaphysical barrier, into the Below Place, and infused him with gamma radiation, turning him into the Grey Hulk. Now over time, Hulk's skin eventually turned green, thanks to some real-world mix-ups, and he became more childlike. In Incredible Hulk #377, the Green and Grey Hulks merged with Bruce to become a new incarnation, Professor Hulk. But these three different incarnations of Hulk are just a few of the personalities that live in Bruce's fractured mind, and not all of them are good people. On to Bruce's family, starting with Brian Banner and Rebecca Banner. While Bruce is naturally the core figure in this family tree, the roots of the Hulk's rage come from his father, Brian Banner, and without him, there would honestly be no Hulk. If there's a villain in this story, it's Brian. He physically and emotionally mistreated his wife Rebecca Banner and their son. As seen in Incredible Hulk #312 from 1968, Brian became deeply disturbed and obsessed with the idea that his radiation research had turned his son Bruce into a monster. Brian was even responsible for the passing of Rebecca in front of Bruce, which led directly to the development of multiple personalities for Bruce and the Hulk. Years later, during the Chaos War, Brian actually emerged on Earth as a fearsome Devil Hulk of his own before he was defeated and returned to the afterlife. More recently though, Brian made a lot of trouble in Immortal Hulk as a servant of the One Below All, and he even gained the ability to possess other gamma-infected human beings. Now Brian Banner himself had two sisters, but the one we want to talk about is Elaine Banner Walters, and her husband, Morris Walters. Their daughter, the lawyer Jennifer Walters, is Bruce Banner's first cousin and probably the closest thing he has to a sibling. It just so happened that as Bruce was seeking legal aid from Jennifer, she was nearly killed during an assassination attempt. Bruce saved her life by giving her an emergency blood transfusion, but as a result, she became the She-Hulk. Although she started out as a bit of a savage She-Hulk when she first appeared on issue 1 of her comic in 1980, Jen's personality eventually became dominant when she was in her gamma-powered form. In fact, she actually prefers being She-Hulk and put her skills to use as an Avenger and member of the Fantastic Four at one point. In case you've missed any of the ads, she is also the focus of the MCU's She-Hulk attorney at law. Now, the first love of Bruce's life was Betty Ross, the daughter of General Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross. Betty and her father both actually became Hulks as well. For Betty, the villain MODOK realized that her exposure to Bruce Banner set her up as an ideal subject to become a new Hulk. In Incredible Hulk number 168 from 1968, Betty was transformed, but not into another She-Hulk. Instead, she actually turned into a terrifying Harpy who hated the Hulk for the passing of her husband at the time, Glenn Talbot. Betty was soon cured of her Harpy persona, but she was ultimately killed by exposure to Axis gamma radiation by the Abomination. Fortunately for her though, MODOK and the Intelligentsia resurrected Betty and she became the Red She-Hulk. However, in the Immortal Hulk series, Betty once again has been transformed into the Red Harpy. I hope that wasn't too confusing. Now, as for her father, no one hated Bruce Banner more than Betty's father, General Thunderbolt Thaddeus Ross, a military general who became obsessed with stopping the Hulk at any cost. That's why it took everyone by surprise when Ross actually turned out to be the Red Hulk, who is a fiery and power-draining gamma mutate. Ross made the mistake of partnering with the Intelligentsia, who tricked him and turned him into the Red Hulk, using energy siphoned off of the original Hulk. Ross embraced his newfound Hulk powers, proving to be an incredibly powerful and capable hero. Bruce and Ross eventually did make an alliance to take down the Intelligentsia, and Red Hulk was actually invited to join the Avengers. Ross was eventually depowered, but as of Captain America number 26 from 2018, he is once again the Red Hulk. Now, when the Hulk was banished from Earth by the Illuminati during Planet Hulk, he crash-landed on the planet Sakaar, which is where the Hulk met his second wife, Kaira. Although Kaira appeared to die in the destruction of Sakaar, she actually gave birth to Bruce/Hulk's first children, Scar and Hero Kala. Scar became an incredibly powerful warrior with a vendetta against his father, but thankfully Scar and Bruce reconciled before becoming a formidable father and son team. Unfortunately for Hero Kala, his taste for power and vengeance corrupted him, and he also nearly destroyed the Earth in Incredible Hulk's number 617, before his father and brother sealed Hero Kala within the center of an alien planet. Hulk's other daughter is a bit trickier to explain. The short version is that Lyra is a daughter of the Hulk and Thundra from the alternate future timeline of Earth 715, where only 5% of the female population were fertile. Hulk and Thundra were never actually a couple. Instead, Thundra collected the Hulk's DNA from his saliva during a fight and immediately traveled back to her alternate future, where she used that DNA to create Lyra, who is basically a She-Hulk, and actually gets weaker the angrier she gets instead of stronger, meaning she has to reach a meditative state to reach peak power. Now, Lyra eventually came to live in the present alongside the Hulk, Jennifer Walters, and her extended Hulk family. Finally, in terms of Hulk romances, we have Jarella, the princess of the subatomic kingdom of Kai. She was never married to the Hulk or Bruce, but she loved both halves of him very much, and he also loved her. Their bond was so important that Jarella definitely is included on this list, despite the fact that she tragically passed away before they could wed. From Hulk's actual family to those who are essentially his family by association, his friends and allies, starting with none other than Rick Jones. If not for Bruce's timely rescue, Rick Jones could have been the first Hulk, but instead, he was spared from that fate and became one of Bruce Banner's closest and most trusted friends. In Incredible Hulk number 325 in 1962, Rick did actually get a little taste of Hulk power when he fell into a chemical pool that was being used to merge Bruce and the Hulk back into a single being once again. Rick emerged as as a Hulk, but he was cured a few chapters later in issue number 332. It wouldn't last long though, as thanks to the meddling of the intelligentsia yet again, Rick was mutated into a new version of Abomination in Hulk number 2 in 2008. As this new Abomination, Rick actually retained most of his personality, and so he renamed himself A-Bomb, so he could be a bit more heroic, which was a good choice, Rick. Good job. Rick was also horrendously mutated in Immortal Hulk before his humanity was finally restored in the limited series Gamma Flight from 2021. Doc Sasquatch, or Doc Samson. Doc Samson is one of the few members of the Hulk/Gamma family who willingly transformed himself. It happened in Incredible Hulk number 141 in 1962 when Bruce Banner was temporarily cured of his Hulk persona by removing the excess radiation from his body. Samson couldn't resist taking that power for himself, but he wasn't turned into a full Hulk. Instead, he was given superhuman strength and a striking head of green hair, likely due to his psychological makeup with him wanting to be a hero. In Immortal Hulk, Doc Samson got trapped in the below place and instead resurrected into the body of Walter Lankowski, also known as Sasquatch. He then became a green-haired version of the Sasquatch. Despite his great strength, Samson's greatest contribution to the Marvel Universe has been actually as a therapist for heroes and villains in need. During the event World War Hulk, Amadeus Cho was one of the few heroes who stood by the Hulk in his battle against the Illuminati. This was fueled by Amadeus' unshakable assertion that the Hulk is actually a hero and not a monster. Now, years later, in Totally Awesome Hulk number 1 from 2015, Amadeus got his wish to become a Hulk as well. As revealed in issue number 4, Amadeus absorbed the excess gamma radiation from Bruce, saving his life while transforming Amadeus in the process. It was a burden that he was more than happy to accept. However, not even Amadeus' intellect and personality could keep the negative aspects of being a Hulk at bay forever. After briefly losing control of his other self, Amadeus willingly depowered himself, but he still retains a significant amount of gamma powers as an agent of Atlas. The Juggernaut, Agamemnon, Glenn Talbot, the Red King, MODOK, Ravage, Wendigo, the UFOs, with a special shout out to Absorbing Man, are all villains that come into conflict with the Hulk. We have already talked about his longest lasting foe, Thunderbolt Ross, or the Red Hulk, but what about his other big bads? Starting with probably the most iconic of the Incredible Hulk's rogues gallery is the one and only Abomination. A dark mirror image of the Hulk, former soldier Emil Blonsky becomes the monstrous Abomination in an attempt to stop the Hulk, being mutated by a gamma machine that was created by Bruce Banner. On countless occasions, Abomination has taken on the Hulk in a one-on-one match. While he's lost time and time again, there have been times where he did give the Hulk a run for his money and even took down the people Hulk loves and cares for. Abomination makes for a fantastic villain, and there's a reason Marvel keeps bringing him back. For someone like the Hulk, a villain with higher intelligence is far greater than someone with equal strength. Samuel Stearns was once a normal man who was exposed to a high level of gamma radiation, just like mostly everyone else. The radiation gave him increased intelligence, a really big head, literally, and turned him into the leader. A foe who has time and time again outsmarted and worked around the likes of the Hulk. The leader's almost always 5 steps ahead of Bruce Banner and manages to bring the Hulk down despite his immense strength. And lastly, it honestly makes sense that the most terrifying foe for the Incredible Hulk is actually himself. While the Abomination can be seen as a dark reflection of the Hulk, the Maestro is literally a future evil version of himself. Coming from one of the comic's best Hulk story arcs, Future Imperfect, the Maestro is the last hero who survived an apocalypse and set himself to become the ruler of dystopia. Stronger than his past self and with all the intelligence of Bruce Banner, the Maestro has proved himself to be the strongest and most brutal Hulk villain out there.
The Summers family tree. What a tangled web this tree has become. Okay, well, I guess we have to start somewhere, so why don't we start with the original Summers? The first one to ever appear on panel at Marvel Comics. That's right, I'm looking at you, Slim. First up, the first Summers, Cyclops. Scott Summers was the first of the Summers family tree to appear in the comics. He made his first appearance in the X-Men issue number 1 in 1963. There, Scott was introduced to us as a somewhat self-doubting character who would become a leader but still struggle to see himself as worthy of love and deserving of his own happiness. Scott operated as a part of Professor X's X-Men team under the codename of Cyclops, and when Professor X was called called away on a secret mission, Cyc would take his place as team leader, often maintaining a position as leader of the X-Men throughout the years, both in a field leader and commander role. Even today, at the time of this recording, Scott is currently the leader of the X-Men in the current 2022 X-Men comics, almost 60 years later. When we first met Scott, we didn't know very much about his family life or childhood, but as we got to know him, we learned more about how he came to be the Professor's Golden Boy and his first X-Man, and along the way, we'd also learn about his mysterious childhood and family as well. Who exactly are the Summers? At least in regards to Scott's original family tree before he grew up, he had his own family, which is its own tangled web that we'll attempt to unravel later on. Let's start with the easy stuff. Scott's parents are his father, Christopher Summers, and mother, Catherine Ann Summers. Scott was the eldest in his family, but also had a younger brother, Alex. When Scott was young, his parents seemingly perished in a plane accident. Alex and Scott were saved by their parents, who gave them a parachute and got them safely out of the plane. As a result of this near-death experience, Scott would sustain permanent brain injuries that he still suffers from to this day. Scott would not only be plagued by this, but also by nightmares of these events, which he struggled to recall with clarity as a result of the brain damage he suffered that fateful day. We later learned though that Scott's parents didn't die in that exploding plane. Instead, they were actually kidnapped, beamed aboard a Shi'ar spaceship. Christopher Summers was a US Air Force pilot, aiming to become an astronaut, but after being kidnapped by the Shi'ar and escaping them, he became a space pirate, known by the name of Corsair. Christopher escaped his captors the first time almost as soon as he was kidnapped. At least initially that's what we were kinda told, but he was recaptured after he tried to rescue his wife, Catherine, who was and killed by Emperor Deken of the Shi'ar Empire in front of Christopher. Christopher as Corsair would find love again though with Hepzibah. Hepzibah, from an alien skunk-like race known as the Mephitissoids, would be among the group that would band together to escape Shi'ar captivity and become the starfaring group known as the Starjammers, which Corsair is the leader of, becoming like a new sort of family for Corsair. Alex and Scott, having no next of kin, would be taken in by an orphanage. But whose orphanage was it? You may have already guessed. We're talking about a surprise, often unwelcome addition to the Summers family tree, Mr. Sinister. That's right, this is where Mr. Sinister's obsession with the Summers family, chiefly Scott, started, when Alex and Scott were taken into the state home for foundlings in Nebraska, where Mr. Sinister was the head operator. He had his administrator secure the two boys. While Alex was later adopted by Andrew and Joanna Blanding, who would legally become his adoptive parents, Scott was not, and he stayed behind at the state home, where Sinister would often run tests on him in secret, becoming more and more obsessed with Scott and his genetics over time. Eventually, however, Scott would run away, running into Jack Winters, known as the superhuman criminal Jack O'Diamonds, and would later be rescued from Jack with the help of Professor X, who would then recruit Scott into his school for gifted youngsters, and later his mutant team, acting as sort of a father figure to him. Alex, however, wouldn't only receive new foster parents, but also a new foster sister, Haley Blanding, who's also part of our family tree. The Blandings actually adopted Alex to help them heal from the death of their son, Todd Blanding, and in a way, they wanted him to replace the hole that Todd had left in the family, kind of also making him like be the new Todd? Yeah, it's pretty messed up. Unbeknownst to both Alex and Scott, they both had a secret younger sibling. Their sibling wasn't a secret because, you know, their parents had like kept their existence from the two boys, but because Kate actually hadn't known she was pregnant at the time of the flight. As she was killed, the baby in her womb was taken from her and placed by Emperor Deken into an incubator accelerator, which caused the baby to grow quickly into a young man. This mysterious younger brother is the man that is known as the third Summers brother, Gabriel Summers. He would become known more commonly though in the comics as Kid Vulcan and then later just as Vulcan. In fact, for many years in comic book history, readers would be left on a cliffhanger surrounding his existence, as it was first alluded to by Mr. Sinister back in 1993 in the second volume of the X-Men in issue number 23. However, it wouldn't be till 2005's X-Men Deadly Genesis series that we would actually get to meet this third brother and have his true identity revealed to us. There's also the weirdness that in Deadly Genesis, it's established that Kate was only days away from having the child. Yet, in the original art where she is shown to have been made to join Emperor Deken's harem and then she's killed, she looks very non-pregnant. There is also the fact that it mentions she was only 2 months pregnant when first abducted, which actually applies that Corsair's initial escape attempt didn't actually happen as soon as maybe we originally thought it did, or it was originally implied, if she was only days away from giving birth, so he would actually have been in captivity then for a few months. Aside from that weirdness, we would also learn that Kate also had several children with Emperor Deken, that is, genetically speaking. Deken had these offspring created with the hopes of expanding the genetic potential of the Shi'ar Empire by introducing different kinds of genetics into it. When he was young, Adam was taken from the lab he was created in by Jonath, who became his adoptive father, hiding Adam's true origins from him. Adam would grow up and later become known as Adam Naramani, or codename Adam X. And originally, as he appeared shortly after Sinister alluded to Scott having multiple brothers, not just Alex, it was believed that he was the one, other than Alex, that Sinister was referring to. Adam X was a half-brother to Alex and Scott, but later Gabriel would be implied to be, you know, that extra brother, although Sinister could have been talking about both or either for all we know, really. Adam is of course both tied to the Shi'ar royal family and to the Summers family tree, as he would later learn. Between the three brothers, each had their very own different life experiences, which would lead them to having different kinds of families. So before we move on, let's go forward and talk about some of their kids, the Summers children, and weird relations. I feel like for the Summers brothers' families, it is easier for me to go in reverse order from youngest to oldest. So let's start with Vulcan. Vulcan, after being rapidly aged to his prime years, was enslaved by the Shi'ar and sent to Earth to serve the Emperor's envoy there, but instead ended up escaping and was found by Moira McTaggart, who took him in and had him join her own roster of mutants. His story training with Moira is introduced in Deadly Genesis. Vulcan is known for being the most powerful of the Summers children. Vulcan would end up in space after being recruited to a mission to save the original X-Men and kind of failing somewhat. Vulcan would return to the Shi'ar Empire, end up imprisoned, freed, married to Deathbird, and later on would also become Emperor of the Shi'ar Empire. Which, yes, this does mean that the Naramanis would have become his in-laws, including Deken, who killed his mother, imprisoned his father, and enslaved him. Wow, that's a messed up family right there. Which also makes Adam X both Vulcan's half-brother and his nephew. Pretty wild stuff. Deathbird and Vulcan would have a baby together, although we still don't know that child's name, if it's still around somewhere. Deathbird being a mother was even acknowledged as recently as the 4th volume of New Mutants issue number 5 from 2020. And well, that's really all there is to Vulcan thus far. Now let's talk about Alex. Alex would grow up to become the mutant hero and sometimes villain known as Havoc, and it's no wonder he sometimes turns a little evil considering how rough his life was both leading up to joining the X-Men and even after that happened. Alex was given his codename and original costume by Larry Trask after being taken captive by his Sentinels. Alex would attempt to refuse to join the X-Men multiple times, but eventually it kind of just became inevitable. Originally, Sinister believed his power levels to be greater than Scott's. Initially, Mr. Sinister actually suppressed Alex's mutant ability when it first manifested when he was a child. He put side blockers on him and wiped his memory of the incident that triggered it, as Alex's powers were considered to be too uncontrollable. They would only be triggered again later when he ran into an X-gene copy of himself in mutant-human hybrid, the Living Monolith. Yes, the Living Monolith is here! Amit Abdul, who had been mutated by Apocalypse using Alex's DNA, making him like a genetic brother of sorts who was psychically linked to Alex. Alex would only have one daughter that we know of, surprisingly not with any of his more popular romantic ships, but instead with Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp. They had a daughter in an alternate timeline which has since been wiped from existence. She was pretty adorable and awesome, and her name was Katie, or Catherine Summers. In typical Alex Summers must suffer Marvel fashion, after having half his face melted by Kang, he is the only one left with memories of Katie, so he can't even talk to anyone about it. Janet doesn't even remember being with him or their daughter. I still kinda hope one day that Katie will get to return via the main timeline somehow. Finally, let's talk about the mad complexity that is Scott Summers' family tree, with Jean Grey, Madeline Pryor, and beyond. Although Scott was always sweet on Jean, she became the Phoenix and later Dark Phoenix, seemingly dying, sacrificing herself to save others once she turned dark. It was after her apparent death that Scott met Madeline Pryor, spelled Lynepryor, probably one of the most commonly misspelled names in all of comics. Madeline happened to look just like Jean. What a coincidence! Scott fell in love with her and left the X-Men to settle down with Maddie. Together, the two had a baby, Nathan Christopher Charles Summers, initially referred to in the comics as Baby Christopher. However, their relationship started to deteriorate when Scott decided to return to the new, old X-Men team, X-Factor, after Jean Grey was revealed to be alive and well, herself joining the team. Jean hadn't died, it turned out, but was simply in a stasis cocoon at the bottom of Jamaica Bay, while the Phoenix adopted her form and personality, appearing as her, later seemingly perishing. But of course, this is the Phoenix Force, so we know that that is not true. And, you know, it gets even weirder than this. The Phoenix Force, along with Mr. Sinister, were later revealed to be like parents to Madeline, who it turned out was a clone of Jean Grey created from a piece of the Phoenix Force. Surprise, surprise! No wonder she looked almost identical to Jean. This revelation, in combination with Scott abandoning her, would drive Madeline mad. Feeling abandoned, she would ally herself with Alex Summers and also take him for her lover. He would become known as her Goblin Prince, and she would become the villain known as the Goblin Queen, aiming to retrieve and later seemingly sacrifice Christopher, who had been taken from her by Mr. Sinister. And it gets somehow even weirder than that. After Maddie was dealt with, Jean would be given memories of raising baby Christopher, so psychically he was like her own child. Baby Christopher would later be taken by Apocalypse, saved by the clan Ascani, cloned, and later grow up across time, becoming a time traveler who we all know as Nathan Summers, or Cable. Nathan's evil clone, who was raised by Apocalypse, now also weirdly, I guess somehow in this family tree, would be known as Strife. Cable would rescue the mutant Messiah, meet a woman named Hope, who he fell in love with and married, and name the adopted baby mutant Messiah Hope Summers, after his wife and her adoptive mother. His daughter Hope had a biological mother before that who died, which we now know was named Louise Spaulding. Before being with Hope Summers though, Cable would be married to Aaliyah Dayspring, his first wife, with whom he had a son known as Tyler Dayspring, aka Genesis. But not Apocalypse's wife Genesis, or Apocalypse's younger clone Genesis, or Apocalypse's alternate universe son Genesis. None of those Geneses. In a weird twist, Aaliyah was also an initiate in the clan Ascani, who originally saved Nathan when he was a baby. The other weird thing about the clan Ascani is Mother Ascani, who saved Nathan as a baby, is also part of the Summers family tree, being a daughter of an alternate reality pairing of Scott Summers and Jean Grey. So Nathan as a baby was actually saved by his alternate reality stepsister, or you know, just sister if you consider Jean to truly also be his mother. Let's rewind back a little bit to after the X-Men beat Madeline Pryor during the events of Inferno. Scott would end up later married following his disastrous relationship with Maddie, of which he is actually a good deal responsible for, to be honest, to Jean Grey, his first love. They would not have children in the main continuity, but as we already know with Mother Ascani, had children together in alternate realities. While I won't mention all of those children here, two important ones in regards to their interactions with the main continuity are Rachel Summers and Nate Grey. Sometimes known as Ascani, or Prestige, or Phoenix, or Marvel Girl, Rachel Summers is from the same reality as Mother Ascani, Earth 811, the Days of Future Past reality. And Mother Ascani is actually not necessarily an alternate version of her, as Rachel was actually split into separate beings across time when she sacrificed herself to save her teammate Captain Britain. Rachel is immensely powerful and previously lived on the blue area of the moon in the Krakoan habitat known as the Summer House. Not residing in the Summer House on the blue area of the moon is Nate, or Nathan Grey. Nathan Grey actually has a psychic link with his alternate reality self Cable, and is like Cable if he wasn't infected with the techno-organic virus, making him kind of like a more perfect being. Nate Grey is actually the genetic offspring of Jean Grey and Scott Summers, and was made by his reality's Mr. Sinister, who there is just known as Sinister, although he was also raised by his reality's Forge, so that's kinda like his foster dad. Nate Grey goes by the codename X-Man, and is basically like a mutant version of Jesus. He hails from the reality of Earth 295, the Age of Apocalypse reality.